Okay, so excited to have my friend Tim Bakker with us today. Tim, welcome from the Steal from the Best.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm super excited. I'm glad we could connect again, Andrew. It's been far too long. And Brad, it's nice to meet you and just sort of obviously chatting prior to this, sort of all the connections. I think it's going to be a fun chat.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, I've always wanted to have you here, have this conversation. Given Brad and I've been trying to highlight stories of success, and going through the grind of sport. We love when we can combine sports with business. You're someone that's gone through a professional athletic career and then also found a fantastic corporate career as well. So I think we got a lot of exciting stuff to talk about, with your football career, and then as also that transition moving from a competitive athlete to the corporate world. So I'm just really excited to dive into all that stuff. But this is also just really fun to catch up with you, man. Like, it's been too long,
I
dude. You
know.
live in Edmonton.
Yeah, yeah.
So we it's kind of like during COVID, people did these video chats, but I guess we kind of forgot to do that because this does work. This does work to be able to see you like this and do that. So I certainly appreciate that, man. So let's dive in. Let's go back to your early athletic days, when you and I were dominating sports at OTHS in Oakville. Uh, you more so than me. But you played multiple sports. You certainly played, you could dominate in the basketball court. Rugby was certainly a sport that I'm sure you learned a lot from. And then you decided eventually to specialize in football. So maybe we start there. When did you sort of decide that, football was the sport that you would specialize in? And then of course that took you to Western, one of the great, football programs in the country.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's funny because it's something as a father of two, teenage daughters that are big into sports. I find very frustrating because I think the rush to specialization in kids sports now sort of drives me crazy because I think,
Oh,
as you mentioned, we got, baseball was my first love. You and I met, I don't know if you remember this, but we met at Olympia Sports Camp
yes.
playing basketball, rugby, football, and it never seemed to be an issue, right? Like you could play all the different sports growing up when we were kids, and I think it helped me ultimately in my career in my chosen sport, which was football. And I went to Western to play football, and believe it or not, I was still playing rugby. At sort of, I played rugby up until Canada under 21, but I think it would have been my freshman year, going into my sophomore year of at Western, where I sort of said, you know what, I got to just knuckle down and bear down on one. I couldn't keep up with the demands of both, and so I'd say sort of that freshman summer, playing rugby at Oakville Crusaders, there was just sort of an epiphany at the end of that summer that, I needed to kind of focus on one. And I wouldn't have ever thought that necessarily at that time that I was maybe going to have a professional career, but I kind of could figure out that I was pretty good at the sport, better than most. And so I just decided then that, hey, now's the time to focus on just the one sport.
Let's unpack that specialization thing for a minute, because I gotta tell you, I am beyond frustrated about that right now. I got an 8-year-old, a turning 8-year-old boy. Brad and I both are guys into hockey, so we often talk about our boys, hockey careers at this ridiculously young age. And if he wants to play on a rep basketball team, it's almost like it feels like at U9 is an age where he has to choose between basketball and hockey, which feels absolutely ridiculous. And obviously, it's a shame those two sports don't really mesh that well. But talk about, first of all, I'd love to know what sports your girls play as well, because that sounds awesome. And maybe talk a little bit more about what you learned from being able to play multiple sports, and just why it's so important, because it's something that we've talked about a lot, and it's really frustrating. I believe that there's a lot of conversation about it, but no one really knows what to do about it, because these leagues are all kind of competing against each other.
Yeah, so I have a 15-year-old and a 13-year-old daughter, and sort of where we first saw this sort of rush to specialization was my youngest daughter got into gymnastics, and that's a whole other podcast dealing with
Wow.
the sport of gymnastics. But anyways, I would have said at around the age, like you said, 8 or 9, we got pulled aside and we're like, she needs to do like 40 hours of gymnastics a week. And, they wanted to pull her out of school early a couple days a week. And, my wife and I had long conversation. I was just like, you know what, that's just ridiculous. It's insane to me, because she also had a very strong passion for soccer. So both my kids are huge into soccer, and both really love track. And fortunately, track obviously very much complements soccer, and we've managed to sort of, we're able to carve out time for those two sports. But yeah, it's just and it's funny, I think it's almost a Canadian thing in some senses, in that, I preach all the time. Every year they do the NFL draft, they do this study, and all 32 of the first round picks played multiple sports up until college. And so I just, I find it frustrating here, and who knows the reasons. Obviously there's a lot more money in the US sort of sports system, so I don't know what it is exactly, but it's more and more of a problem. And I never played hockey growing up, and neither did my three brothers, so I'm not as intimately in the know in hockey. But I can tell you, Andrew, if you guys think hockey is intense in Southern Ontario, you should try living in Northern Alberta. Like the pressure that is on parents to sort of pay for all these skills and camps and everything. It's just the stories I hear from some of my friends that have kids in hockey are just the thing of nightmares.
Yeah, it's come down to all this specialty training, but the difference from when we were kids to what it is now, is that now sports just run year round. Like when we were kids, it seemed like, yeah, you're going to play baseball or soccer in the summer, and then you're going to play hockey in the winter. And when the season's over, you can go into the next season. But now everything just bleeds into one another. So I think that's the big issue that we're facing. That's amazing. I love it. But I want to get back to talking about the CFL and you and the CFL. You said you knew that you had the chance of a pro career, I guess pretty early in your university at Western. At what point did it become a reality that when you graduate, you're going pro? And also, I want you to walk us through the draft and you finding out that you were going first round, because we've had some other pro athletes and we talk about we've talked to them about getting drafted. One was an MLB draft first rounder, and another was an NBA who actually didn't end up getting drafted, that thought he would get drafted in the NBA. What was draft day like for you as well? I guess I'm throwing like a two-part question at you, and if you can take that and run with it.
No worries. Mine will not be nearly as exciting as probably your other guests, but because back in those days, now the CFL draft, you see it on TSN and there's a little bit more behind it. But back when I was about to get drafted, I guess I probably knew in my junior year that something might happen. There was, one of the fortunate things about playing at a place like Western is, you would have CFL and NFL people roll through, and I think it's probably even more prevalent nowadays. There's a lot of Canadians in the NFL, whether they've gone through the US, the NCAA route, or even through the CIS route. You kind of had an inkling, some of the better players on the team kind of, would get chatted to and sort of, talked to by these people. And I would say in my senior year, I sort of had a good idea that I would get drafted. Did I ever think I was going to get drafted as high as I did? No, I don't think so. Because there's a lot of play in the CFL draft. Obviously there's, Canadians that maybe play in the US. Were they going to get a shot at the NFL? Is the team going to waste a pick on them because they might not ever come up, that type of thing? But yeah, so my draft experience was sitting in my apartment in London, Ontario, sort of watching it go through on the maybe for some of the younger people on this that listen to this, the early internet days type of thing. So refreshing the screen, and I got a call from the Edmonton I guess Eskimos at that time, now Elks, their offensive line coach, Bill McDermott. He gave me a call and just sort of said, "Hey, what do you think about coming out to Edmonton?" And I said, "Sure, let's do it." And that was sort of that was sort of the overall experience. I was super happy. My family was happy, and yeah, and then it just sort of, then the work started to begin, and yeah, and I guess the rest is sort of history.
Yeah, what does the business of the CFL look like? Like, is there are there at that time, are there signing bonuses for first round draft picks, or how does
Oh
that work?
yeah. I mean, what I always explain to people is the CFL is a mini NFL, just not with as many zeros behind the paychecks. And so yeah, there's all that. Back in I think nowadays there's a lot more structure to things like compensation, salary caps, those types of things. But back in my day, there was a lot of stuff that was, hey, we can't pay you, this way, but we'll pay for your apartment, we'll pay for your car. There was a lot of those types of things back in the day. So
Yeah.
yeah, I know it's gotten a lot more formalized and above board type of thing, but that is the one thing, regardless of sport. I think most people that have played it is there. Once you go pro, you see that it is a business. Like it's no longer, I mean, obviously we all still played for the love of the game, but there's a lot of the business aspect of that, meaning you are now just a cog in the wheel, and they're always trying to replace you, find somebody cheaper, younger. So it takes a certain mentality to be able to focus on your field play and sort of obviously, push that to the side when you're on the field, but it definitely is a business.
Oh, I can't wait to get into the mental piece of it. But I feel like you're being quite modest here, man. Like it was number 3, correct?
Yeah.
Third overall, man. That's
Wow,
totally
amazing.
badass.
Yeah.
Like third
Yeah.
overall in the 2000 CFL draft. I think that's pretty awesome, dude.
Well, my kids will tell you that there must have been 2 people better than me. So
Keep you honest.
yeah, exactly.
That's an old Homer Simpson quote. No matter how good you are at something, there's always somebody better than you.
Yeah.
Let's keep it inspiring.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your first year. Did you feel prepared going in? Obviously it's a huge leap going from, the collegiate level to the professional level. So talk about that adjustment period. Was there any, coaches or people that really helped you adapt to the, probably a more, physical game? Just dive into that first year. Tell us what that was like.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably going to sound cliche, and I apologize for this, but it's like, it's, I think, your other guests from other sports would probably have said something similar. It's just the speed of the game. It's you're no longer, they're all alpha personalities. They were all, the best in their high school, or, you got guys, like I played around 300 to 320 pounds, and you've got guys that are close to that are, running 4.7s and stuff like that. So it's, you got guys just as big as you, but are faster than you. And, just the technique and just learning all the things. And I would say probably the biggest jump, and I think where it helped me the most, is the mental side of the game. People will say that, oh, dumb football jocks or whatever, and it couldn't be further from the truth. The guys that succeed, regardless of sport, but we're talking about football here, is I don't think people fully comprehend how intelligent you need to be to play football, because a play gets called in the huddle, and then there's any different type of permutation based on what the defense does. A defensive lineman can move half a foot to one side, and then every blocking assignment's changed. It needs to be communicated. Like there's just, it's just constant communication, and that's why, I know Peyton Manning, obviously with all of his calls, has gotten quite, people have dived into that because you hear it now with the mics, but it's like that on every team, where, you almost have a hidden secret language, because you got to keep it secret from the defenders. That language can change from week to week. If there's a former player on your team is now on the other team, and, they would have access to that sort of verbiage. So, there was a lot of guys that came through different teams that I played with that would be physical specimens, would be the best athletes on the field, but they wouldn't last because they just didn't have the mental fortitude to deal with that side of the game, which is just something that doesn't get a whole ton of focus
Yeah.
Oh, I
So
totally
how
believe in that.
how did you prepare mentally for all the games? I mean, did you have a specific routine that you followed, or what was that? I mean,
Yeah.
I know how you physically prepare for football, but how do you mentally prepare?
Yeah. So one of the things I try to explain to people, and we may talk about this a little bit later when we talk more about my corporate career, but um, uh, is I often got asked to talk about this very subject because obviously within corporate world, there's a lot of aspects of team and preparation that companies like to delve into. But really, um, every minute of your day, as it relates to the training, the practicing for football, is sort of, in my world, it was always in 7.5 minute increments. And that wasn't my creation. That was just sort of like, the football world, they're called periods. And, most teams would run at that time at 7.5 minutes to break up the practices. And one of the things I try to mention to people is every single time you stepped onto a practice field or a game field, you're being videotaped, and every movement is videotaped. After practice, when you go shower, it's being graded. And then some teams, we would do it right after, everybody got ready, they'd bring in lunch or dinner, and you would sit there and watch film with your position coach or your offensive coordinator, in my case, or any combination of, and you'd be evaluated. So, you would have to prepare that, your every step was being watched and you were being graded on it. And, one of the sort of the famous lines within the football world is tape never lies. And so you had to sort of just, build that up into your mindset that every rep counts. So every whether it's an individual drill, whether it's team drills, you're being watched and graded. And you know you just had to get used to that, because I think if you didn't realize that, hey, you can't hide, I guess is the best way to describe it, that you always had to be accountable to what you did. And then the flip side of that is, and I think one of the things that sort of helped me along in my post football career is, you're only as good as your last play. So you just have to keep working towards that. If, say, maybe you didn't have say maybe you missed your assignment or something on the previous play, but if you could gather yourself and realize, like, that's in the past, like you got your next play, you're only as good as your next play. So I think religious sort of film study helped me sort of prepare mentally, so then that way I felt confident when we got into games.
Yeah, no, in the CFL, I guess there's there's obviously different people who are at different levels on the team. Was it a full-time job for most, or was there a balance between having to work outside of their professional career of their professional football career at the same time?
No, you've hit on a sensitive topic for me, because yes, for most people it was a full-time job, but when I played, Hugh Campbell was the president and general manager in Edmonton, and Hugh's big philosophy was, and again, I think there was a method to his madness, is he really encouraged guys to work. So when I started, there probably would have been 15 to 20 out of the 70 players also worked during the season, and I was one of them. I started working at the Royal Bank, and we can touch on that a little bit later. But he felt that obviously it would embed guys in the community, and so I sort of viewed it as, I didn't have to spend any of my CFL money. Like, I think I saved about 80% of my CFL earnings over my 10-year career, because I worked full time. And why it's a sensitive topic for me is sort of, I would bet you there's less than one guy on each team now that works during the season. And
Wow.
I just think it does guys a disservice. I just found that, and maybe it's just how my brain worked, as I have the football side of my brain, but I also had the, footballs could end at any minute. And I didn't want to be 31 years old and not have anything on a resume, so to speak.
Wow, no, this is a perfect segue. I'm not sure if I want to give up on this football chat yet, but this is a really good segue to talk about that transition. So you feel like that having that opportunity to work really, helped you in that transition away from professional sports? I mean, getting to play professional sports is something most boys and girls can only dream of. I mean, certainly, Brad and I never came close to getting paid to play anything. And you look at it and you get, adoring fans. You get to play basically with your best friends. So the camaraderie, I imagine, is absolutely off the charts. So talk about, going from, the glory, getting to do that, basically do almost everyone's dream job, to then transitioning to away from it and it kind of being gone and over.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's two parts. Talk about expand a little bit on that. Having to get the opportunity to work while playing and how that helped you in your transition, but also just really dive in mentally. Like, what was that? Having to give up you know, the glory and the joy of getting to play professional sports.
Yeah, so two things. You obviously knew my dad, who's
Hmm.
unfortunately no longer with us, but
Hmm.
uh, my dad wouldn't let me sit on my butt for 6 months in the off season. So I after my rookie year in Edmonton, I actually worked with Bank of Montreal. So our with our other friend Dave Highland, he kind of helped me get my foot in the door there, and then I decided I didn't want to go back and forth from Edmonton to Ontario. So that second year, Edmonton's a community-owned team, so there's a board of directors, and they had a relationship with the Royal Bank. So I met the regional president at Royal Bank, and so I started working at the Royal Bank my second year. So I would work during the season, and almost like it's like a version of their Olympic program that they have now. Like,
Hmm.
they're
Hmm.
very flexible, obviously, during the season, and then I would work full time. So I had like I virtually worked my entire CFL career as well. So I think for me, the transition wasn't necessarily as hard as probably for, um, some of my former teammates, where it's like you go from playing a game you love one day to, oh crap, I got to figure out how I'm going to put food on my table type of thing. So I feel very blessed that my parents sort of pushed me to work from day one. And like I said, it allowed me to sort of, use both sides of my brain, which I really appreciated. And then, it's funny because I will never forget this day. Um, uh, my last year, what would go on to be my last year, and it would have been towards the end of the season, maybe a month and a half towards the end of the season. I drove up to the stadium, I parked in the stadium, and I couldn't get out of my car. And I just looked at the stadium, and I just had that internal feeling where it was the first time in my life that I'd ever pulled up to a practice or a game in any sport I've ever played, where I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, I just gotten to that point, whether it was from the business aspect, me and the coach at the time didn't see eye to eye, the just the rigors of it, my my wife at the time, we had never done really any vacationing, because my mindset, and maybe it was wrong, but I always thought I was getting cut. So it was like, you just had that mentality of, I can't take big long vacations. You have to train, you have to do this. And so I just got to the point where I was like, I'm done. And at that point, I was still obviously working for Royal Bank, and just by fate, one of my previous sort of managers had seen a role come up, and she was like, hey, I think this role would be good for you, but I think it would probably take your full-time attention, and are you ready for it? And I said, you couldn't have called me at a better time. I'm ready. And I was actually interviewing for the job during the last weeks of the season. So I did my final interview for the sort of the role that I've, continued on in with different companies, but in the Hotel Regina, I was in my room doing my final interview, and then I kind of had an idea that I was going to get the job, and then I hopped the bus and went and played in Saskatchewan.
Oh man, that's an amazing story. I really appreciate you sharing that, and sort of that, vulnerable moment when you're in your car and having that real revelation. I can't imagine the rigor, like the stress on your body, right? Being an offensive lineman, nine seasons, Tim.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what people don't realize too is it's like, if you're sick, you don't just call in and say, "Hey, I'm sick." No, you have to go to the stadium, and they've got to, you're not laying at home, sort of just
Yeah.
putting your feet up type of thing. So again, it was just sort of I knew that moment had come.
Wow.
That's
Were,
wild.
were
Yeah,
there any, coach, before we, because we're still sort of on the football side of things, or in that, straddling the two sides here. Were there any coaches that helped you prepare, not just from like a football level, but like, from a, personal level, or from a, giving you some tools that helped you on and off the field? Was there anyone really like inspirational in life that was able to sort of, help you with that and mature as both an athlete, and, as a husband, as a father, as a, as an employee for, or as a getting into a corporate career job?
Yeah, I'd have to say I had two. Sort of my two biggest influences would have been, my coach at Western would be Larry Haler. Um, you know, Brad might know a little bit more about Larry than you do, Andrew, but I think in the moment you probably don't realize as a young adult the lessons that are being impacted on you by a coach, because Larry was a hard ass, but looking back on things, there was a purpose to it. He could see what individual players, the ability that they had, and he got the most out of them. And I just think I think Larry just had a unique ability to he expected the world, but he helped you along your way to get to that. And I think I always share this story when people sometimes ask me, but like when I was getting recruited to go there, I was getting recruited by a lot of schools in Canada, and the one common theme, because all my dad, as a frame of reference, my dad went to Western, my two older brothers, eventually my younger brother went to Western as well. And so, as the third child, I was kind of like, I'm not going to Western. I just did not want to follow necessarily in my family's footsteps. And, the common theme with every school that I visited was everybody came back to shit talk Western. And I kind of was like, if everybody's talking so much shit about this place, like, well, maybe that's the place to go. And this might not feel good for a lot of Laurier grads, but I was ready to go to Laurier. And I just remember I was having lunch with the head coach at the time, and I think it was the defensive coordinator at the time, because I actually played defensive line too in high school. And I sort of at Western, I just sort of, the quickest path to playing was O-line. But they just kind of went on a rant about Larry and Western, and I just sort of in that moment, I just sort of, something switched in my head, and I was like, you know what, I think I'm gonna give this Western thing a more of a serious look. And so
it's a great story.
Yeah. And then the second biggest influence from me, even though I only played 1 year for him, would be in BC, would be Wally Bono. I think Wally is probably, well, I mean, everybody already knows this. He's one of the greatest coaches in CFL history, but just, he was the first coach, professionally at least, that was honest. And you might sit there and kind of say, well, what do you mean by that? Like, Wally would get up in training camp and say, my job is to win football games for the guy that owns this team, who was David Braley at the time. He goes, I have to put the best product on the field. And he said, but I will be honest with each and every one of you in the room. If I don't think you're, pulling your weight, I will give you almost like a 2 weeks notice to either you pick your game up or we're going to have to part ways. And one of the big things in professional sports is I think a lot of times coaches aren't honest. Like, there would be repeated times where, I would have coaches that you'd see a guy in the locker room and, having a conversation with the coach, and the coach would be like, "Oh yeah, I know, you're doing a great job. You're doing a great job." And 6 hours later, the guy's packing up his locker. Right. So I always appreciated from Wally was his honesty with players. And I think that's why he was so successful, because, he shot it to you straight, and that's not a lot of things, at least when I was playing, was necessarily the norm.
Yeah. People people respect honesty, and people want honesty, and I'm sure that lesson really helped you in your career. Back to Larry. Yeah, they were actually really good family friends of ours growing up. We do Christmas with their family every year. I know Larry's big thing was he would challenge the hell out of everybody, and it was the dare to be great, and force people to look within and compete as hard as they always could. It's amazing.
His famous line for us too after games on Saturdays was, he'd do all of his football talk, and then he would say, "And use good judgment."
Oh yeah.
As we were all hitting the town.
I think that was talking about steal from the best, that I think that was actually taken from my dad.
Yeah.
So what were some of the big lessons that you learned on the field? I know you learned how to win, you learned how to lose, you learned how to persevere through tough times. What were some of your big lessons that you took away that you were able to, I guess, use in the corporate world? And it sounds like you're doing a lot of talking around in the corporate world as well, as you'd mentioned earlier from your experiences in the past. But what were some of the biggest takeaways for you?
Biggest takeaways. Well, one of the biggest takeaways I'd sort of always mentioned, and I sort of view it now in the world I'm in sales, is, you're only as good as your last play, so you're only as good as your last sale. So I find why I have become very successful in my world of group retirement and pensions is, hey, I get a client, that's amazing, I celebrate the win, but then it's like, you know what, I where's my next win coming from? And so it's kind of that constant drive of, there's always got to be something, I got to keep getting wins. So I think that was one of the big things. And then I also think that one of the things that, my sports career helped me with is guess what? You're not going to win every time. You know what? You're going to get knocked on your ass. There's other guys bigger, stronger, faster than you, but it's what you do when you get knocked on your butt, how you come back. I think was probably the biggest. I'm sure in all of our life's experiences, you've had this prospect or potential client that you're like, and I can still, I have a mental track of them still from ones from, 5-10 years ago, where you're like, I'm getting this client. And then for some reason they don't go with you. And you're just kind of like, I think some people that struggle in sort of that corporate sales world don't allow for introspection. Whereas, I think because sports, you were always watching yourself on film and correcting yourself. I think a big part that's helped me is being able to sit there and sort of say, hey, you know what? I didn't win this game. Why didn't I win? Was my preparation not up to snuff? Did I not, read any of the leading indicators, or did I misread the body language of the person I was talking to? So I would say those are some of the big things that I've pulled from my life experience. And I think too, and again, I don't know if this is a good thing or not, but just that whole life of where you're constantly being watched, I probably, unfortunately, I've brought that on into my post football career, where I just always think that somebody's looking to sort of say, hey, we're going to try to find somebody different, which is ironic because, I own part of the company that that I work for. So, but I just think it's a hard thing. I think I retired when I was 31 from football. So, I don't know. I started playing at 8-9 years old, and it's a lot of years of being trained. One way to think.
Well, I'm so glad you brought that. I actually wrote it down to circle back to that whole accountability factor being taped like that, and whether or not that influenced your corporate career. And it sounds like it has, for better or for worse, but I probably a net positive.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I've been very blessed. I've had a great post football career. Sometimes I think there's a horseshoe somewhere, because just everything's worked out great. And the other thing too that I did this more when I worked for the bank. They would have me go around and talk about my football experience around team and all that stuff. But the other thing that people don't necessarily remember or understand about football is it's like, as a rookie, or a new person to the team, here's the big playbook, boom, on your desk. You got to memorize it. And, oh, by the way, practice is, 3 days from now, 2 days from now, something like that. So, just sort of, again, going back to that mental part of football about how you can sort of, take concepts and, remember your assignment. And then, then you have to remember the snap count, and you have to all these things, and sort of, it's just how I don't even know how I did it, but you just have to have this ability to sort of, view the game from a concept wise. And then that helps you, if you're, and this would, anybody that would say different is a liar. There's many a time when you get up to the line of scrimmage and you're like, oh shit, what do I do on this play? And so you have to be able to really quickly, dive into your memory banks to sort of pull it up.
Yeah, you're someone that I look at the game of football very differently because of you. A lot of people, the way it's portrayed on TV is about skill position, but it all starts at the line of scrimmage. And I love being able to look at the sport that way, because it really is, you talked about the complications of it, the mentality, that the intelligence piece. In many ways, it is a game of chess, and a lot of the other major sports are checkers in comparison. With so many different combinations and whatnot. So that's a lot of fun to dive into that today. Let's talk about, going from RBC to Lloyd's, and making that move, becoming, an equity partner there. Talk about that opportunity and making that leap.
Yeah. So, I spent 20 years at RBC. The last sort of 12 of them I had done group retirement. So helping companies implement and administer their group retirement programs as a benefit for employees, and gotten pretty good at it. Was sort of consistently the top person in Canada. And being in little old Edmonton, that's quite the accomplishment. And I guess I've been here about 5 years now, so 4 or 5 years. And prior to us becoming Lloyd SAD, there was another entity called Vanta Group, and I knew the 3 of the 4 owners just because they were in the industry. Vanta Group was a group pension and benefit advisory firm here in Edmonton, and one of the guys, Rich Groom, had reached out to me and sort of said, "Hey, would you ever leave RBC, or are you an RBC lifer?" And I said, "Nope, I definitely would be open to it, but I'm not coming over to be your employee." And so we sort of negotiated a deal where I bought into then Vanta Group to become an equity partner. And about 2 years ago, we joined forces with another firm in Edmonton that's a PNC commercial insurance organization called Lloyd SAD. And so we've latched onto their branding, and we do the same thing on our, we still do group pensions and benefits and some individual life insurance under the banner of Lloyd SAD Consulting. And so, I'd mentioned earlier about having a horseshoe is just sort of, it was like the perfect time to leave football. It's the perfect time to leave RBC. I latched on to another firm we're just skyrocketing. And it's just been fantastic.
Wow.
I could not be more happy. And it's one of those, again, cliche things, like, if you love what you do, you don't really work a day in your life. And I find that that's sort of the world I'm in here as I'm about to turn 46.
Yeah, well, there's another quote, I'm not sure who said it, but I can't remember the athlete. It would come to me, but I'm sure I could use the Google machine. The harder I work, the luckier I get. And I think that sums you up pretty well, man, because it's so much more than just luck. I think you've earned it. You've put in the time, you've developed the skills, and I mean, you've got the results.
Yeah, I saw that exact quote written on the board in one of my kids' hockey rooms, and it was the first time I'd ever heard it, but the previous team that was in there left it on the board, and I copied that exact quote down, and it's like, that's awesome. Now, Tim, if we could go back, if you could go back in time and look back at 19-year-old Tim who's walking into Western University for the first time, what kind of messaging and what kind of advice would you give yourself?
Great question. Well, I'll give you my real answer, but my joke answer is I'd stand up to my mother and I would have played at Arkansas State, because maybe I would have been in the NFL and I wouldn't have to work. Because my mother wouldn't let me go. But anyways,
another great story that I did not know.
On a serious note, you know what? It's funny because I try to say this to my kids. Growing up, like we were, I had a good life. Like my parents were not super wealthy, but like I never got any of the name fashion brands or anything like that, but I never wanted for anything either. And I would just say to my 19-year-old self, and what I say to my kids now is like, just enjoy the moment, enjoy being young, I guess. And maybe that's me entering a midlife crisis, but it's just have fun, just experience life. And I would say that's probably my biggest regret, is that I was so rigid with just the process of sports that I didn't let my hair down enough as a younger person. And again, there's obviously pros and cons to both of that, but I would definitely say to my 19-year-old self, like, go have fun, have a fun time at university, and just experience everything, experience different people, try new things. And that's what I try to put into my kids nowadays is, it's easier said than done. But just to enjoy being young, a little bit more probably than I did.
I like that. I like that a lot. Would you say that you're able to, you can still maintain the process? You can still, you can kind of combine the two. It's more enjoying the moment a little bit more. Like it's not necessarily giving up the hard work or taking it easy or anything like that, but you're able to combine the process with being able to enjoy the moment, enjoy the wins, enjoy that sort of side of things.
Yeah, totally. Like I definitely think I definitely think you can do I could have done a better job of balancing the two. I use the example of my wife and I would go on a 2-week honeymoon, and a big part of the reason where we went was because the gym was good enough. Like like I think think about that. That to me sounds ridiculous now, but that was that was sort of the mentality.
My wife and I do that, and we are not even close to professional athletes.
Yeah, but you're also in way better shape than me, so maybe
what were some of the resources that kind of helped you along your journey? Were there any like books that stand out? Do you listen to any podcasts now? Anything like that comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I will have to say sheepishly that I just started. My wife and I went to Kelowna. We typically drive out to Kelowna once a summer for a little bit of a getaway, and she got me on the Jason Bateman.
Oh yeah. What's it called? Shameless? No.
I think, is it Shameless? I think it might
something
be
less. Smartless.
Yeah. So that's my first podcast that I've gotten into. But back in my day, I wouldn't say there was necessarily any books or anything that sort of helped me along my journey. I think the one thing, and again, it kind of brings us full circle back to the opening conversations around kids sports, is I was so immersed in sports. I would watch, if I wasn't playing sports, I was watching sports. And I think, at least in my experience with my kids and kids on their teams, they just don't do that anymore. Like, I mean, there's the rare kid that does it, but it's like, technology has sort of taken kids away from that they're on TikTok, they're on Instagram, they're on all those different things that you wonder how kids, again, I just think that being immersed in watching the sports that you played helped you along the way.
Yeah. And now kids, yeah, you're right. They don't watch full sports. They'll watch the highlights on TikTok.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what they get. So they won't really be true students of the game.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's so true. Yeah, we could definitely talk a lot about technology and how to, again, something that's a net positive, but only if you're able to control it in a certain manner and use it for the right things. Obviously, be a tremendous resource in sports and learning new skills and that sort of thing. Sometimes my young son, opened up an email account. So I'll send him a video of how to hit a baseball. I mean, obviously we do it together in the backyard, but kind of fun. He goes in, opens it up, and watches a 3-minute clip on, hitting a
Nice.
baseball, and then we go out in the backyard and do it. So it can kind of be fun that way, but you definitely, it's something to monitor for sure, as we talk about, mental health and kids, but that is a whole other conversation.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, obviously we're coming up on our time here, Tim, but this has been an absolutely fantastic. I really enjoyed every minute of getting to have this conversation with you, unpacking your career a little bit, learning new things. This has just been so much fun. I want to ask a little bit about, what motivates you today, knowing that you're such a motivational guy. How do you get out of bed in the morning? What gets you going to compete the next level, in your career now? What is it that gets you going? And maybe you can talk a little bit too about, the support of your family, because you've talked about that a lot. You've got a beautiful family as well. So, just to talk a little bit about the motivation, and if you can intertwine, the support of your family, that'd be great too.
Yeah, I have a wonderful family. My wife, January, and my 2 daughters, Avery and Alyssa, obviously are big motivating factor. But one of the things that I've really found in my role is, so I get to meet business owners all day long. That's sort of, my world. And the one thing that I always ask them, in one of the first, sort of interactions with them is, how did they get to where they're at? And I just find the inspirational stories of, hey, I was 22 years old, and the guy, I was working in a mechanic shop, and the guy said, hey, can you scrape together $10,000, and and I'll make you a 30% equity partner, and 40 years from now, that $10,000, the company is a $600 million trucking company. And I just have always been fascinated with that because I come from a very conservative family, and so that entrepreneurial sort of spirit of my clients and sort of the people I interact with is really one of the main reasons why I get out of bed every day, because I just love hearing these stories from business owners, and just sort of that there was that one moment in their career where they had to make a decision, and because it could have easily gone the other way, right? Like you could have lost that investment, and oftentimes that happened. But just hearing the inspirational sort of genesis stories for my clients is something that I get a real kick out of.
Oh, I love that answer, Tim. That is amazing. And it also sounds like you might be able to refer some future guests on Steal from the Best.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
perfect. Tim, I've loved our conversation. I love the Western football talk and the pro sport talk. It's being able to combine sports and business is that's a dream for Andrew and I. So you've been an amazing guest, but we're not going to let you off so easy. We gotta finish off with our signature question for you. Tim, what is the best tip that you ever received? I guess, or better yet, what have you stolen from the best?
Well, I guess the one that has always resonated me with, I think it can play into the business world too, is always be the hammer, don't be the nail. And so oftentimes I get asked by parents, that have young kids in football, and they're like, well, I'm nervous about them playing football. And I said, you know what? The people that get hurt are the people that were the nail. And so just be the hammer, don't be the nail. I think it's sort of something that I've taken through my sports career and also my business career.
That's awesome.
Fantastic. Oh, Tim, I've loved every minute of this, man. It's so great to catch up like this. You've got a fantastic story. This is going to be one that I look forward to listening to with my family and my kids, because it's great. You've got really good life lessons here. And congratulations on everything, really, man. You've really done incredibly well, and you should be proud of all your accomplishments.
No, I appreciate it, Andrew. And I appreciate our friendship, because it takes a big man to stay friends with a guy that beat him out for that Olympia basketball MVP.
Oh, the parting shot. I love it.
No, sincerely though, Andrew, great catching up with you. We got to do this offline as well. And
In person.
Brad,
Yeah.
really nice to meet you, and I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks, Tim. Thanks so much.